Hi, my name is Mike Tate, and I'm here to talk about contracts. And I'd like to speak about them not from a perspective of a lawyer, but from this perspective of a business person. A good contract can not only deal with your legal situation and your transaction, but it can also really help support your value proposition and support your go-to-market model. A little bit about Trailhead Consulting. We provide operational and financial expertise and processes for your business that will give your company a foundation for successful growth. I work primarily with startups and businesses that are in transition. This is based on 30 years of experience in both finance and operations. Within finance, having worked in manufacturing and business unit financial planning, as well as with international business financial planning. In operations, I've built supply chains, set up S&OP management processes, worked with product commercialization, worked with OEM customers in setting up their contracts, as well as with contract manufacturers and managing those relationships. And then also, I've got a lot of experience in business integration for acquisitions and mergers and spin-outs. So with that introduction, I'd like to talk about our objective for today. And our objective is really to help you think about those key relationships that you have in your business, the companies that you need to contract with, and think about what are the contract terms that are important to you operationally in delivering your value proposition and your business model for delivering it. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not a lawyer. You'll want to have a lawyer heavily involved in your contracting operation. What we're looking at here is the business aspects and how to drive those into your contract for a better solution for you, your supplier, and your customer. The way we're going to do this, I'd like to first review some of the possible requirements and risks of your business and how they might be addressed in the contract. Then we'll look at two business examples and how we look at their value props, their business model, and what they might want to consider putting into their contracts. And then we'll talk a bit about, whether, now that we understand what we'd like to have in a contract, what are the challenges in getting those into a contract and evaluating whether it's really worth putting those terms into your contract. So some of the requirements that I want to speak with you about are intellectual property, product quality, capacity and fulfillment risk, exclusivity of supply, and then product changes. And we'll talk through each of those as possible things to incorporate in your contract. So intellectual property, it's an area that is definitely one that your lawyer will heavily advise you on. But as we think about it operationally, in intellectual property, we're talking about things such as patents, trademarks, copyrights, and then things such as know-how or trade secrets that you use in your processes. Now, intellectual property, it may be something that your supplier or your customer is working very closely with. So they may need to know some of your know-how or your trade secrets in order to supply components to you, or your customers may need to know your trade secret information or your patent information in order to produce the product that they're producing. And when they're innovating close to your intellectual property, there's chances that they may come up with ideas, cost reduction ideas or improvement ideas that are patentable by them. So when we think about contracts in this situation, we want to think about how to protect our access to that intellectual property. And that can come through negotiating things such as IP usage rights, so that your supplier or your customer have rights to use your IP in making the product that's going to include your component or making components for you. Additionally, you want to think about assignment rights. If you have a customer or a supplier who comes up with intellectual property, you may want to have access to that intellectual property, and that can be done through a grant back or through a lifetime royalty, a royalty-free license back to you. so you can continue to innovate, you can cost reduce your product and not be inhibited by their intellectual property. Likewise, you may want to have upfront negotiation of penalties associated with IP violation, so that it's not just ambiguous and drawn out by courts. Another area of operational concern is going to be quality. And quality is not just what's in your product when it exits your factory, but it's also how your customer is going to use your product and how maybe your downstream channel or your transportation companies are going to ship your product. One of the things that you want to be concerned about, especially when you're supplying product to another business, is how is their application going to impact the impression that others have of your product? Is it going to be an application that enhances the quality of your product or adds to the attractiveness of your product? Or is it going to be an inferior design or inferior application that really pulls from the value that you're trying to communicate? When you come to your channel partners in transportation, how are they handling your product such that the value of that product, the quality of your product is preserved throughout their processes? So things that we think about with these and addressing them in a contract is with your OEM partners or a partner who's building a product using your component, you may want to have rights to approve how they're using that product or the ultimate item that they're putting it in, so that you can assess whether it's enhancing of the value of your product. With your transportation or storage partners, you'll want to think about, the conditions and the requirements for your product and making sure that they follow those in your contract. Another area we're going to talk about is capacity, your capacity supply. And it's great to get orders, but if you can't fulfill those orders, you're going to have dissatisfied customers, not only the customer that you can't fulfill, but maybe other customers that you're also contracting with. And so you may want to have ability to limit the ability of your customer to just drop a very large order on you. And this is where in a contract, when you have multiple customers, you can basically say, look, I need forecasts from you. Or you can basically say, if I have one customer that can give me a forecast, other customers that cannot give me a forecast, the customer that can provide a forecast for you can get priority of your product. And then likewise, you may want to be able to decline orders that are too large for you to fulfill or that are in excess of a threshold amount, so that you can control your ability to produce product, keep your customers satisfied, and you've upfront worked out a relationship for establishing that communication. The same as you have with your customers and your capacity, your suppliers may have fulfillment risk, and this is something that you want to be aware of. And this fulfillment risk with your suppliers can be short-term and long-term in terms of the type of risk that you have to deal with. Ways to address that in the contract would be things such as requirements for that customer, that supplier to expedite your product if they can't get it to you on time. You may have to ask for partial fulfillment of your orders, or you may ask them to carry safety stock to make sure that they can always fulfill your product up to a certain amount. When you think about long-term supply, that's when we think about things such as business continuity planning. Do they have a plan to ensure that if there's an event such as a fire in their factory or even pandemic in the area, can they find alternate manufacturing places that they can quickly bring up to produce your product? Obviously, with COVID, many companies had experience with that, but pandemics can also be very local. And so we want to plan for that. Pandemics, IT issues that may come up for your supplier. An extreme case would be where your supplier can no longer supply completely. And in those cases, you may need to get access to that supplier's intellectual property. So it may be a situation where you say, look, if you can't produce the product, I need access to your IP and need your designs so that I can take them elsewhere. And so that's something that you can do to really protect yourself on supplier fulfillment risk front. Another area that a lot of customers will ask for is exclusivity. They say, you know what, I like your product. I want to be the exclusive channel for your partner, or you may have an OEM partner who says, I want to be able to use your product in mine only. And this can seem like a great opportunity to get a premium price from them, but you also want to think about, okay, how do I make sure that they're going to give me the volume that I want? So you can think about performance thresholds for them maintaining that exclusivity, and that's a very reasonable way to have them think through, you know, how important it is to them, and it also is a way for you to have some assurance that you're going to have an ability to get out of that if they're not performing. The last area I want to touch on is product change. You may have suppliers who want to change the specification of something that they're providing to you, and that can impact your product design. Sometimes you'll have a supplier who has specifications that they can no longer meet. They need to make changes, or they may just have tightened something up and all of a sudden your product no longer performs the way you needed it to. And this can be a very challenging situation in a product where you've got very tight tolerances for your product design. Likewise, you may have your downstream customer, your OEM partner, may have done certain designs that limit your ability to make certain changes in your product. If you need to make a component change in your product, or you can no longer deliver to a certain spec, they may turn around and say, look, this isn't performing the way I needed it to. So some ways that we think about addressing that in a contract would be through some pre-notification procedures. So having a good product change process in your plant, having your suppliers have a good product change process, and pre-approval of product specification changes can really avoid the surprises that you may have from your supplier or that your customers may have from you. In addition to having notice, there may be an opportunity to say, okay, I've got to make the change, but you have an opportunity to make a last time purchase. And that will give you or your customer, you know, additional time to do redesign if they need to do redesign to handle the change that's being thrown at them. Here again, rights to IP may be a last resort that you need in order to, if your supplier can no longer produce the product, you can then take their intellectual property, take their design, and make it on your own behalf. So those are a few ways that we can address some very operational situations and put those into a contract that we've got real operational control expressed in our contract. So I want to look next at two examples of companies, and we'll think about, you know, what their product is, what their value proposition is, and how they can incorporate some of these things into their contracts. So the first example is your company is a business that provides high quality activewear for young adults, and it reflects current fashion trends. And so your value proposition for this company is today's activewear that performs. You're delivering your product through dealers, through distributors, through online stores, through physical stores. So in this business model, if we think about the partners that we're dealing with suppliers, upstream material providers, we're dealing with distributors, dealers, and we're dealing with transport providers. When we think about the value proposition that we have, the things that come to mind are we have a quality product, we have product that requires speed of product introduction, and we have a product in which we want to preserve a premium price. So let's think about, you know, what are the things that we want to ensure that the companies we're working with are going to have in order for us to deliver that value proposition in the way we want to deliver it. And things that come to mind here are quick turnaround and delivery of our product, very tight inventory control, the ability to flex our orders with demand going up or down. We want quality materials and workmanship. And then last of all, we want to maintain our premium price for this product. And let's look at some ways to incorporate those into our contracts. So quick turnaround and delivery. We want to think about priority on the capacity of our suppliers, transport commitments that we make sure that it's being delivered rapidly, probably air transportation as opposed to sea, so that we can get it to our customers quickly. The next two, tight inventory control and the ability to increase and decrease, these kind of play off a little bit against each other. But so we'd want to be able to have small quantities of stock, low minimum order quantities, so that we can control our inventory and not have a lot of scrap if consumer tastes change. When it comes to being able to increase, decrease demand, here we may want to think about having risk buys of certain upstream materials so that we have stock on hand to be able to flex up. We want to think about reserving capacity with our suppliers so that we can get into their production line quickly and get a run made for us. The other area that we talked about was quality. And so when we think about our material suppliers, we think about our assembler for our product, our stitcher. We may want to think about being able to approve their suppliers, approve the upstream supplier of the material that the partner is working with. We may want to be able to audit or approve their QA process, that we know that they're performing to the level that we want them to perform. And we may also want product warranties built into that contract. When it comes to preservation and premium price, this is where we look at our downstream channels and how we make sure that they're not discounting our product if they have overstocks and such. So we may want to, for their benefit and ours, have stock rotation rights built into the contract so that they can turn over inventory that's not moving. We may want to be able to accept back returns, give them the rights to accept back return items to us, so that we don't have product being deep discounted in the marketplace. So those are some things that company would think about as they're building their contract. The next company that we'll look at is a product that's a business-to-business line. And this product provides a proprietary product that's in, this company provides a proprietary product that's incorporated in wind turbines. And their value proposition is putting wind to work. It's an OEM business, so it's a component that's going into a very expensive wind turbine. And based on this business model, when we look at this one, we're thinking about, okay, we have suppliers for our materials and for maybe assembling our item, whatever it is. And then we also have the OEM customer who's putting it into their wind turbine. Things that we're going to think about with this particular product are, we want to have a superior performance based on our proprietary design. We have durability that's very important to our product. We want consistent product performance, and we want a reliable supply. So as we think about things that we want to build into a contract to make sure we can enable those things, things that come to mind are protection of our intellectual property, making sure we have product reliability based on the quality of the assembly or the components that are going into it, good conformance to specification, strict lot control and tracking. And this is something that we would think about when it comes to defects and changes that may have been introduced to the product that we're unaware of. When we're putting a product into a very expensive downstream item, we want to make very sure that we can isolate changes, and that's what the strict lot control and tracking is going to do for us. Additionally, supplier capacity and continuity planning on on the part of our suppliers is extremely important. So let's look at the concepts that we'd incorporate into a contract to enable these. One would be protection of the intellectual property, both with our suppliers and with our OEM partners. And so here we'd look at things like grant backs of intellectual property rights, assignment of IP enhancements should a new enhancement be discovered by our supplier or by our partner, our customer. We additionally want to look at, IP violation penalties for suppliers or for our customer in order to really protect the value of our product and our intellectual property. Here as well, we talked about product reliability. So here, same as with the other business that we looked at, we'd be looking at understanding the QA process that our suppliers have, maybe having audit rights to their factory to make sure that we understand how they're producing and making sure they have good process control in their factories. For conformance to specification, to make sure that our product is consistently made and performing to the level that we need. Here's where we want good product change control in our supplier factories. And we want to push that into both primary and upstream suppliers. We may want to have test specifications that are in place that we approve or we see the test results of to make sure that the components are hitting the performance that we expect of them. We talked about strict lot control and tracking. So this is really understanding the IT expectations of our partners and the reporting requirements that we place on them. So we may build into our contract certain expectations around their IT capability and their reporting requirements to us. Lastly, for supplier continuity and capacity, this is where we think about things such as business continuity plan, having reserve capacity, maybe having them have safety stock requirements so that we can consistently deliver product to our OEM partners. So these hopefully gave you some ideas as you think about your business and think about what's important to you, your value proposition, your go-to-market model. What are the things that you would then build into a contract for your business? Now, before we conclude this, we also want to think about whether it's worth doing, whether these things that we would like to get into a contract are something that's going to be readily deliverable in a contract. So some things that I think about when I think about whether I'm trying to put something into a contract is the condition measurable? So if I say, you know what, this product has to perform at a certain defect level, can I actually measure that defect level such that I can say, hey, it's no longer at that level? For some products, you won't see that when the product's delivered because the defect is not recognizable till many months after it's been delivered. For some products, you may have a desire to have a certain condition, but you really can't measure that condition, whether it's ever been satisfied. So those are the kind of things to think about. Another thing would be, is the language enforceable? And when I say enforceable, is it legal? But also, is it practical? So if we take the example of a component going into a wind turbine, if that component is maybe 5% or less of the total value of that wind turbine, and it's not something that you can get at to replace, then replacement is not an option. So you really, can't, if you put in language that says you'll replace the item, it really doesn't do your customer any good. It's not something you can fulfill, and it would just frustrate both of you if you had that language in the contract. Another question is it reasonable that the partner would agree to this? And obviously, reasonableness is in the eye of the beholder, but you're forming a relationship with this customer. It's not just a one-time thing. It's a relationship with a customer or a relationship with a supplier, and it's going to be ongoing. And so If you're driving for something that's very important for you, you want to make sure it is indeed important to you and not something that's just going to be odious or objectionable to your partner, or it's not going to be a healthy relationship. So ask yourself those things and go ahead and fight for the things that are important, but make sure those are things that are really important to your business. The last thing that I think about is it worth the cost? And when you're in a relationship negotiating, obviously there's two parties there, and your counterpart is going to want something in return for a request that you have. And is this something that is important enough for you to put in there that you're willing to work through the costs of what the customer or the supplier is going to come back with for their requests based on what you've made? So those are the kind of things that you think about, and many of these items that we talked about, you're going to be able to get into a contract. And other items you're going to say, you know what, I can't measure it. There's not much I can do. I just need to make sure that I've got that concern covered in other ways, or I'm going to have exposure in that area. So those are just some ideas. Obviously, we haven't been exhaustive in this presentation, but I think hopefully that I've given you some things to think about that are going to prod you to step back and say, okay, I'm going into a contract. What are the things that are important to me operationally, and how do I build those into this relationship contractually? And so just in conclusion, I want us to come away from this remembering that a good contract with a supplier or a customer, it's not just providing legal protection and transactional terms for conducting the business. A good contract is going to support your value proposition, and it's going to support your operating model. So I'll leave you with that, and hopefully you've now got some ideas to take away as you look at your contracting with your suppliers and with your customers. Thanks.